Motherhood, but not quite as we imagine. Thought-provoking, refreshing, straightforward, sometimes taboo, often seemingly ordinary, but always honest. Welcome to School for Mothers, opening conversations we all need to have, exploring ways in which you can be fulfilled as a woman, once a mother. Now, here is your host, mother of 10, Danusha Melina Durbin.
My special guest today is Joy Foster, who's an award-winning serial entrepreneur who recently raised £150,000 for her current venture, Tech Pixies. Now, Tech Pixies helps women upskill with modern technology in order to return to work, change careers, or start a business. Joy is a mother of 2. She's married to Olympic gold medalist Tim Foster, and she lives in Oxford in the UK. Now, let me tell you just that little bit more about her to whet your appetite. She's been a Christian since she was an incredibly young girl, when her vision for her life was to become a missionary. She attended Christian camps in her summers growing up, but when she wanted to attend an exclusively Christian university, her parents instead encouraged her to go for a more secular route. In her final year of uni, her dad died, and her life took a dramatic shift. She quit her job to train full-time for the Olympics in archery. I'm hoping to ask Joy about the significance of faith in her life. I'm also, not going to lie, a little bit, like a tiny bit out of my comfort zone here on this one. And in some ways can't truthfully think why. Is it the subject of God? It's definitely not joy. So I guess it has to be. It's God. Now, there's a little tiny side note to this. I had a deeply religious upbringing. Yep, really religious upbringing. And yes, listeners, I was educated at a convent with nuns in Wimples. Yep. So it isn't that I'm religion shy. It's probably that I've had a heavy dose in my life. I'm really looking forward to this episode. So listening to what I'm pretty sure is going to be a different kind of conversation, let's head on over to Joy Foster. It isn't every day that I have a guest on the School for Mothers podcast who dearly wanted to be a missionary when she was a child. But today's guest did. Welcome, Joy.
Thank you, Danusha.
Now, I am so looking forward to this conversation about God. And, I'm kind of slightly at a loss. And I can't decide why.
I'm at a loss too. I think God's a difficult discussion. It's a difficult topic. It's a difficult thing to speak about without controversy, especially in this day and age. So I'm there with you. It's a difficult thing to talk about.
Yeah, and I remember when we first started talking about you coming on this show, and we went through some quite vanilla subjects, didn't we? Like, not that you're vanilla or I am, but just some one-syllable words like thrive, which is a wonderful word, love it, and others.
I think I decided Ariana Huffington owns Thrive.
Yeah, thanks, Ariana. But no, I can still have an episode called Thrive, although I don't know. I don't think I'm going to.
Maybe you should do it with her.
Yeah. Okay. You've got me. I'll do it with her.
There you go.
All right, then.
I'll listen to that one for sure.
Okay. All right. I'm making a note. I'll get her on for that. Yep. So that's great.
Yeah.
And then I remember you saying to me, how about God? I remember saying, sorry, what? God. I was like, really? You want to talk about God?
It's a small word with big meaning, huh?
Oh, yes, I know. And then my commercial head was like, well, no one will listen into that one, will they? I was like, Danusha, get a grip. Come on. So here we are talking about God.
Yeah, it's one of those funny things where this could go either way. No one will listen to it or everyone will listen to it. And the point is, it doesn't really matter. If one person listens to this and it impacts their life, that's the goal. And that's the work that I do and you do every single day is, impacting women's lives and making women's lives better. Mm-hmm. And very much that mission for me has come from a place of faith. And everything I do and have done since I was 27 has been 100% driven and focused on what I feel my calling is. And, that changes, but it's tied into my faith and it's tied into a desire to help people and improve people's lives. And at the moment, that happens to be women who've taken career breaks or who want to change careers or start a business. But, every single thing I do is focused not on selfish ambition, but on those around me and trying to make their lives better. And that definitely comes from a place of faith.
No, yeah, I can chime with that completely. On the other hand, I don't think I would pinpoint the source of my kind of drive would be faith. So nevertheless, I've got a very religious background, religion-based and faith-based background, which I don't think you'd know about at all. So that's probably why I went, God, really? God, do we have to? And you're right. If one woman, one man, we have a lot of men that listen, one human being takes anything from this, then that's fantastic. It's not about the quantity for me. It really isn't. And I think I'm always intrigued by people that say, I want to affect 1 billion this or 1 million by. And I love that. I applaud it. On the other hand, it's really lovely just to have that one human being. So, okay, let's talk faith. When did you become a God follower?
Well, I thought you might ask this question. I was thinking about that. I
hate to be predictable. Come on. Okay, scratch the bloody question. No.
Well, I think for me, it's an ongoing process. So, like a lot of people who are born in America, I was baptized from a very young age. I went to church as a child. I went to summer camp, Christian summer camp, as well as a child for, from the age of 7 all the way to 15. And, but I think the thing is there were critical points. So when I was 7 or 8, I remember very vividly being scared and feeling like if I was going to die, I wanted to go to heaven. I didn't want to go to hell. And so my decision when I was 7 or 8 was based on fear. And so I decided to believe in God and ask Jesus Christ into my heart because I literally was scared that if I didn't and I died, I'd go to hell. And I didn't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I was 13, I decided that I wanted to make the decision not out of fear, but because it was something that I wanted to open my heart to and my life to. And I was at a Christian summer camp. I'd been going there for years and, really felt like I had made my first decision based on fear and wanted my second decision to be based on my heart and based on my future. And so that was when I was 13. And then I had an interesting period of time where I lived in France. And France, if anyone's lived there or spent a lot of time there, has a very deep history in religion. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a deep history in a living, breathing faith. Very much faith in France is dead. And I was surrounded by incredible people doing really amazing humanitarian work, but who were not Christians. And I just didn't understand it. It didn't make sense. And it went back to this question of heaven or hell again for me. And I just thought, how can God have these incredible people on this earth doing this incredible work for him, work that I would never dream of doing? The family I lived with in France, they spent day and night working with adults and children with severe learning disabilities, and they didn't believe in God and I didn't understand it. And I kind of came to a point when I was about 15, 16, 17, 18, where I just thought, I don't get this. I'm not sure what I believe anymore. And I kind of walked away from my faith. I would also say that those years were difficult, because I didn't have something to fall back on in terms of my faith. I didn't have something to go back to that kept my spirits up and my hope up, because a little bit of, when you give up your faith, you kind of lose that equilibrium, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of continued that path through university. And I think those were probably, when I look back at different time periods of my life, my university years were really nice years. They were great years. I learned a lot. I experienced a lot. I did some amazing things, but they were also devoid of God. And I think I made decisions during that time period that I probably regret to some extent, but also felt difficult. And I think I felt difficult because I felt lost. And then when I was 21, my dad died very suddenly. And he died of suicide, which is also a very difficult thing to go through, especially if you're a Christian, because the fundamental, again, going back to all the fundamentalist side of faith, which is one of the reasons why people don't like it and don't attach to it, the black and white side of God is, if you commit suicide, you go to hell. And again, this whole heaven, hell thing just drove me nuts. And I was really upset. I just thought my dad was a really good man. He was a Christian. He had done some incredible things for our church and our community growing up. And he was a dedicated father, a dedicated husband. And I couldn't get my head around him being in hell because he'd committed suicide. And I really struggled with that. And so I started praying again. And that's probably the first time I started praying in about 7 years. I probably stopped praying, stopped going to church during a 7-year period. And I sat down and I got on my knees on my bed and just prayed and just said, please, I pray that my Father is in heaven with you. And that night I had a really powerful dream, and just that Jesus had come to me and said, your Father's with me, and he's well, and you don't need to worry. And so that was really powerful for me. And I think that was a period of time where I thought, this faith thing is real. Jesus is real. He came to me and he comforted me. And there wasn't the first time he'd comforted me when I made that decision when I was 13. I had felt his comfort around me, which is one of the reasons I decided to become a Christian, because when I was young, my biological mom had skied into a tree and was brain damaged. And there was a lot of things you deal with when you've got kind of a family that's broken. And, my dad had remarried, and I had a sister with some learning difficulties, and, she was struggling. And I was a happy child, but I was in the mix of quite a lot of different things that were going on. And, when I was 13, I really felt, when I was praying for some comfort, I felt that comfort. And I describe it like Jesus wrapping his arms around me and giving me a big hug. And it was just then that I knew that that's the comfort that I wanted. And, that comfort came again when I was 21 and I was on my knees and I was not sure about where my Father was. And, that confirmation was so real. And there have been several points since then. But when I was 27, I then recommitted again. It's called, a baptism by the Holy Spirit, which was incredible. I got this huge feeling of heat through my body, and just praying for the Holy Spirit to really guide and direct my life. And, there have been moments in my business in the last 10 years. I've run 3 different businesses where I've wanted to quit, or where I've been kind of on the brink of it not surviving. And I've had those comfort moments and those reassurances and that quiet confidence. And, I couldn't do anything I'm doing now without the foundation in my faith. And I'm really thankful that I've got it. But it's been a real journey. And it's a journey of constantly renewing it and constantly reconfirming what I believe, and living a life of prayer and observation. And, from the music I listen to the books that I read, to the podcasts that I, engage in, what I surround myself by keeps me going and also keeps me focused.
So, my God, you were in a mix, weren't you, of a lot and it's certainly needing a lot of comfort. And I'm really struck by the kind of juxtaposition between listeners. I know, Joy, in real life. We've met, we've had cups of teas and things. So I've had the privilege of sitting across a small table with you and getting to know you, and the slick, highly successful, investment raising, serial social entrepreneur to you. That you're big in impact and big in what you do in the world. And it wouldn't be obvious that this is the bedrock, that your faith was the bedrock. And I'm really touched by the fact that what you said right at the beginning of, this is controversial to talk about. I think you're right. I think you're really right. And it's very brave of you. It's really interesting in a time when we're being encouraged to talk about mental health, for instance, and to be really open and transparent and honest about, our struggles with anxiety and mental health, if we have them. Yeah, it's far less popular to talk about God, isn't it?
Well, and I think in America, the difficulty is in America, the conversation around faith is so in your face. And actually, people aren't afraid to stand up and say, I am driven by my faith, and my faith makes me, do these decisions, and you should join in too. I mean, it's a very evangelical platform. And actually, the divisiveness in America is almost like, if you don't believe, you're in the wrong. And I find in Europe, it's a different conversation, because it's almost like Europe has kind of done the faith thing, decided that too many lives were lost and too much pain was inflicted. And, they've gone away from it. And I can understand that side. And so as an American living in Europe or in the UK, it's a really fine line for me to walk. I feel like I'm on a tightrope, because in America, it's almost something you show off. And in Britain, it's something you kind of hide.
You hide.
And I think I'm becoming more comfortable with talking about it. I think, I was worried about coming on the podcast. I was worried about what the investors might think. Would they be upset that I was talking about faith, as well as, how that's affected my business. But I think, the reality of it is that it's important to talk about. And, I think one of the people that I've looked up to and admired for a very long time is Desmond Tutu. And he wrote a book that's called God Is Not a Christian. And I feel like every American needs to read that book, because I think the importance of what he says is that God was here before Christ, and God is here after Christ, and that very much what you believe is going to be tied into the culture you were brought up in, and I was brought up in America, and very much the American culture is tied into the Christian faith. But if I had been born in Mumbai, or if I had been born, in Shanghai, if I'd been born anywhere else in the world, I would probably have an extremely different viewpoint. And I think the challenge and the difficulty arises when someone puts their foot down and says, my faith is the only faith, and none of the other faiths matter. And I would say that one of the developments as a Christian that I've experienced by living in Europe and also in America has been the exposure to people like Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama. And, there's a really good book called The Book of Joy. And I'm not just saying that because it's got my name on it, but The Book of Joy is a fantastic exploration of Buddhism and Christianity, and, the takes from both the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu from their viewpoints on different topics within the conversation of joy. And I think I've learned that the American kind of Christian viewpoint is very narrow, and it's very one-sided, and that's where you have conflict and controversy, and that's where faith does a disservice. People who have that kind of faith do a disservice, because if you can only see one way and you can't be open-minded to other people's viewpoints and cultural upbringings, you're not going to be able to make progress. And so I feel really lucky that I've lived in Europe, and I feel really lucky that I've lived in America. And hopefully one day, and this may be decades from now, but I will be able to help heal some of the pain that is caused by the single-minded focus of faith, because I think there's a lot of good things that can come out of faith, and a lot of good things that can come out of the relationships that we have with each other and with God. And, it would be a shame to lose those, because a lot of the world's healing does come from faith-based organizations and faith-based driven people. So, I would love to help heal some of that pain that has been caused by the single-mindedness.
Yeah, which obviously a lot of people would say, I think, a lot of the destruction and the wars and the lack of peace has come from faith-based organizations. It's very skewed, isn't it? So,
there's a lot of pain that comes from faith-based organizations, as well as a lot of healing. But I think you look at the work Desmond Tutu did in South Africa, and that was incredible healing work, and that was faith-driven. And then you look at so many of the wars, the ones that are happening now and the ones that have happened in history, and they're really based on this. And God is controversial, and faith is controversial, and what is right and what is wrong. But and that's one of the hardest parts about it. And I think it's one of the reasons that it's hard to stand up and say, this is what I believe in, because you may immediately isolate people. And that's obviously not good.
Yeah, it's the opposite of what you do.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that God is a man or a woman?
That's a great question. I don't actually think he is a man or a woman.
Mm-hmm.
I think God is God. And I think, in my experience, the books I've read and the things that I've experienced, it's more of a feeling and a comfort and a place to rest. And I don't see God as male or female. Now, I do love the fact that you don't get Jesus without a woman. You needed Mary in order to have Jesus. And so I think, when people argue that women don't have a role in religion and they don't have a role in faith, it's an easy one to say, well, hang on there. We wouldn't have even had Jesus if we didn't have Mary. So, I do think women are important. But yeah, for me, God's not a woman or a man. I think it's written into the Bible as he, but that is really because men were ruling the world when the Bible was written. Mm-hmm. And I really truly believe that. But I think God is all encompassing.
I like the idea that God's gender fluid.
Yeah, for sure.
That just tickles me pink. I like that. I want to come back to something that obviously when you talked about your dad's death, that's going to bring big emotions, isn't it? I mean, even though it's years ago, it's a really, it's still not raw, but it's a massive wound in your life, I would imagine. And I want to pick up the fact that you called it commit suicide. And there's been a lot of discussion in the media because, of course, there's a lot of coverage of suicides about the not calling it committing suicide because that makes it sound illegal and it makes it sound, rather than took his own life. And I just wonder what you think about that. Is it semantics or is it really important to kind of take the shame away of the illegality of it?
That's a great point. And I didn't even think about it when I said it. I think it's just, for me, it's a fact. The interesting thing about my dad's death is that it always comes with an explanation. So, people, and I guess the thing is when you say the word suicide, there's like kind of no other way to add. There's no other way to add to it. There's no other verb that goes with it. So took his own life is definitely a better way of saying it for sure. But actually, if you say suicide, there's actually, I don't know that you could say like he did suicide, he suicided. There's no other way to say it. So I think that's a really interesting point is the, maybe we have to change the word suicide because, there's the only word that goes with it is commit. But I think you're right. In the case of my dad, and something that has given me a lot of comfort over the years, but also makes me think about people who've lost parents in other ways to suicide. My dad he had a congenital heart disease, and he was really struggling already with mini strokes, and kind of both of his parents died of strokes and heart failure. So we kind of knew that things weren't going great. But he then had an open heart surgery where they had to replace his aortic valve, and it was a quadruple bypass, which means they have to work on all entries to the heart, all 4 entries. And it's a very serious surgery. And if anyone knows what open heart surgery is like, they literally have to saw open your chest, open it up. They take your heart out of your body, put it on a pump, and then they work on the aorta and all that stuff, and then they put it right back in. And he actually died on the table. And the surgeon was a friend of ours, which is always a tough one. So he didn't want to lose my dad and did absolutely everything he could to bring him back. And in that process, in the surgery, which was very long, and his heart was on the pump for like double the time, or, I don't know, it was on there for hours more. You're only supposed to be on there for like something like 4 hours. It was on for like 8 hours. I mean, the whole surgery was a difficult surgery. Anyway, when they did managed to bring him back to life. They suspect that some air got into his brain and that he had some brain damage. And one of the things that was very difficult for him after the surgery was to calculate things. And he was a very analytical kind of guy, and he loved numbers. I mean, I know exactly where I got that love from, but he loved numbers, he loved analyzing, and he really was good at it. And suddenly after the surgery, he couldn't count change. He couldn't remember things. You know, he really went downhill. And the doctor prescribed some antidepressants. And this is before the warnings went on to the antidepressants that for some people, antidepressants can have the opposite effect. So instead of making you feel better, they make you feel worse.
Yeah.
So my dad ended up feeling worse. And then when they went back to the doctor didn't know that it could do that. And so he doubled the dose. And so my dad went from feeling bad to being horrid. And, you know, basically there of coming out of depression, he went deeper into depression. And after he died, there was a class action lawsuit in America, and we were out of the window to be on it, but we supported it. And it was mostly for teenagers, because what they discovered was this was happening with teenagers, that a lot of suicide was happening. And it was a result of the increased dosages of the antidepressants that were actually causing depression.
Yeah.
And that is why now on antidepressants, there is a label that says it can cause further depression. But that didn't exist when my dad was on the medication. And so now there is a label for it. It's actually called pharmacide. So you would actually say that he died of pharmacide. But if I say that, it doesn't
Nobody would know. Yeah,
So,
exactly. But it makes total sense now that you've said.
Yeah. But he did take his own life, but it was a result of the drugs that he was on at the time.
Yeah.
And I take comfort from that in a weird sort of way. But I think, you know, there's all sorts of reasons why people take their own lives. And I think, you know, for me, I knew he was ill, and I knew the medication played a role. I knew him to be a person who was otherwise very, very healthy mentally. In fact, my godbrother had committed suicide. Again, I say that he'd taken his own life when he was in his 20s, and my dad had rallied around to raise money and support, the helping young men to feel supported and know that they have other avenues in life, and that they can come through difficult times. So, you know, he had been an advocate for life, and an advocate for supporting people through difficult times. So it was such a strange situation for him.
A desperate one.
Definitely. But you know what? I think it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what angle you're coming at suicide from. Desperation is what drives people to it. It is when people are so deep in that place, they don't think there's any other option, and they don't think there's any other way to end the pain and end the suffering. And they actually think they're giving a gift to the people around them, and they're not. They think they are, but they're not. And it's really hard to explain that to someone, that their life is so much more valuable with us than away from us. And everything can be worked through, and everything can be, changed and improved. But when someone's in that dark place, there's nothing they can, it's very hard.
But they can't see it, can they? They can't feel it. It feels like there's no hope.
Yes.
And there's no solutions. There's no way out other than to do that.
Yes, and that's the chemical side of things too. And this is the part that's really important to tell people who are suffering from depression, because there is an element of chemical imbalance that actually doesn't allow them to change in that moment their mentality. And that's the hard part, because unless someone's there to stop them, they can't control those thoughts. And it's just like bulimia, anorexia. One of the most amazing things that I learned when I was reading about anorexia, because I was curious about it, was the fact that this woman that I was reading the story about, she said until someone told her that she could not control it, it was then that she started to heal. And I think it's really important when people do have depression or when they do have, eating disorders, that we are saying to them, there is an element of this you can't control. Because actually by telling them that, they realize that they can release the fact that they feel like they have to have a control over it. Mm. And that's when some people do start to heal.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about control, isn't it? It's all the sense of the belief that one has everything under control. Have you ever wanted to commit suicide?
No.
And I realize I've used that phrase, by the way.
Yeah. But, I think everyone in the world thinks about it. I'm not going to lie. I think everyone in the world thinks, if I was going to do it, how would I do it? And I think when you're a kid, obviously you have those bad arguments with your parents or whatever. And you think, well, maybe if I was gone, they would miss me and love me or whatever.
Sit up and notice.
Yeah. I think honestly, everyone has thought that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure.
I think it's the difference of, and I guess that's the difference. If you're in a healthy place, you recognize that that's just a thought, and that that you're not actually going to act on it. And you kind of just, you just acknowledge it for what it is, which is everyone has those thoughts. I think so. I guess the raw answer is no. I've not thought about committing suicide. I've never tried it, but I've been around enough people in my family. It wasn't not just my father, but my biological mother went through a period of time where she tried to commit suicide, and my sister as well struggled with it. So, I've been exposed to it a lot. I have very good friends who have tried and also struggled with it. So, it's something that I'm conscious of.
Yeah, it's why I'm asking, because the way that you were talking, the way that you were describing that loss of, well, actually the hopelessness, but also the feeling of, actually, I'll be giving a gift to other people if I do this, because life will be better without me. They don't realize that, but it will be. Actually isn't something that, unless you've been close to this, probably a number of times. That's why I was asking. Not because it was just you sound too knowledgeable about the inside.
Well, I'm too knowledgeable about the inside because every biological relative that I've got that's, connected to me immediately has experienced it, and I'm the only one who hasn't. So I think in a way, I feel like I have some knowledge on the subject, even though I wish I didn't.
Yeah. No, I hear that. That's exactly what I was wondering. No, amazing. Yeah, I was at university with a wonderful friend whose both parents actually took their own lives, and she only had one sibling, her brother, and a few years after the parents, he also took his life as well.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, and we talked a lot about it, about what that felt for her, what that was like being left, what that legacy of knowing that was kind of she was surrounded. Literally, she felt, I remember her talking to me about the feelings of being surrounded by suicide and that it might come get her at some point.
Yeah.
Now it hasn't.
I can imagine feeling like that. But I mean, I think so in my family, genetically, we've got some challenges, with bipolar, my cousin and my biological mom and my sister. And, so there are definitely, you definitely think, how did I escape this? Mm-hmm. And will it come and get me? Because a lot of bipolar actually comes out of trauma. So, if you had a huge trauma like my biological mom did by skiing into a tree, that triggers the bipolarism, or, a traumatic incident in your life, like, your father dying of pharmacide or suicide when you're only 18, that triggered it for my sister. And so, so you do think, gosh, how did I A, escape, and B, will it come at some point in life? And it's, but you can't live your life like that. You can't worry about it. You can't, and you just got to pray and hope that if it does come, that you have the fortitude and the strength to take the medication that you need to keep yourself stable. I think that's been the hardest thing for the people around me who are bipolar is, staying on the medication and doing what they need to do to stay healthy and to take care of the people around them. That's very difficult. The medication and the disease, it's very real and it's very, very hard. And it is something that doesn't go away. So, if you're not taking the medication and if you're not doing what you need to do, you can't function. And I've seen that firsthand. And that's been very difficult to sit there and watch it and not be able to do anything about it. But then also the guilt, the guilt that comes, and I'm sure she felt that too. There's a guilt that comes from being the person that's
left
normal.
behind. That's normal, yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to say normal. I shouldn't say normal. That's wrong. There's a guilt from the people who aren't facing the issues that the people who are facing the issues have, and you feel this guilt that why them and not me, and there's a part of you that wants to say, take that burden off them and place it on me. And then there's a part of you that says, thank you for not giving me that burden. And it is such a tough one. But you have to do the best with what you've got, and you've got to be thankful for every day, and and just pray that the support is there for you, when you face a difficult time in your life.
It's kind of no big surprise that you lent into faith. Yeah, given your backstory.
That's a good point.
I mean, you could have taken drugs, of course. You could have. You could have lent into a whole array of other activities in life that would have given you a different result, but.
Well, that's actually a really great point, because I just read something recently that was arguing that basically when you have a difficult time in your life, there's kind of two ways you can go, as particularly with faith. You can reject it. And often when you reject it, you seek something else that fills the void. Or you can go deeper in it. And I think, I had my best friend experienced the horrible loss of her 3-year-old son last year. And I flew out to Switzerland to be with her and her husband and to go through that whole thing with them and plan the funeral and just things you should not ever have to do with a 3-year-old. And they are Christians, and they're quite strong Christians, and it was really hard for them. And this whole year post Skylar's death has been extremely challenging for them, as they've had to decide whether they're going to go deeper in faith or release their faith. And I think it's certainly a place that's been a challenge for them, and a decision that's been a challenge for them. And I think when it comes to the loss of a child or the loss of a parent or even the loss of a dear, dear friend, you always have to be faced with that question, is there life after death? And is this person in a better place? And what do I actually believe? And, and I think you're right. Some people, they reject it and they have to find comfort somewhere else. And that's where drugs and alcohol tend to come into play, or sex as well, because that's a way of getting comfort. And then other people go a different way. And I can tell you that between the two ways, the longer term, better solution for your life is to probably avoid the drugs, alcohol, and destructive sex.
Yeah, it's exactly. It is. But of course, in the moment of deep trauma and grief, that, particularly in the loss of a really close friend, child, and, someone of great meaning in your life, then that whole big question of how could he do this to us? How could God possibly bring this to us? Why do this? Why? If there's a God, then why? Why is there so much suffering in the world? And all of those big questions to which I have no answers at all. I don't, other than we never really know what the gift in any experience is. It's been brought to our feet, it's been brought to us, and it isn't what we chose, but it's going to take us to something bigger and more. That's all I know from having, been through the loss of a stillbirth daughter and all sorts of other traumas that I wouldn't have wished to come to me, that But to convert that, there is a conversion part.
Well, one thing that I do on a regular basis, on a daily basis, and this is part of, choosing faith, is reading things, whether it's the Bible or devotionals, and also, the music I listen to, which help focus, my mind on God and on healing and on, staying strong and all those kind of things. But one of the things that I read almost every day is My Utmost for His Highest, which is by Oswald Chambers. And it's a really unique story too, because Oswald Chambers died in his 40s, his early 40s, and his wife put together bits and pieces of his sermons over his career as a preacher into a devotional. And my aunt introduced me to it in 2011. And I read it almost daily. And you would not believe what today was about. And it was called The Explanation for Our Difficulties. Mm-hmm. And then it says, God is not concerned about our plans. He doesn't ask, do you want to go through this loss of a loved one, this difficulty, or this defeat? No, He allows these things for His own purpose. The things we are going through are either making us sweeter, better, and nobler men and women, or they're making us critical and fault-finding and more inconsistent in our way. The things that happen either make us evil or they make us saintly, depending on entirely our relationship with God and its level of intimacy. If we will pray regarding our own lives, your will be done, then we will be encouraged and comforted by John 17, knowing that our Father is working according to His wisdom, accomplishing what is best. When we understand God's purpose, we will not become small-minded and cynical. Jesus prayed nothing less for us than absolute oneness with Himself, just as He was one with the Father. Some of us are far from oneness, yet God will not leave us alone until we are one with Him. Because Jesus prayed, and they all may be one. I just thought that was really interesting, the very top bit.
Gosh,
where
yes.
It was saying, kind of have a choice.
Absolutely. It's couldn't be more on topic, really, could he? All those years ago.
Yeah, well, and on a daily basis, and another thing that I love, there's a Franciscan blessing, and I laugh every time I read it, and it's one, it hangs up in my laundry room. But it says, may God bless us with discomfort at easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships, so we may live deep within our hearts. May God bless us with anger at injustice, oppression, and exploitation of people, so that we may work for justice, freedom, and peace. May God bless us with tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, hunger, and war, so that we may reach out our hands to comfort them and turn their pain into joy. And may God bless us with enough foolishness to believe that we can make a difference in this world, so that we can do what others claim cannot be done.
Oh, it's fabulous. Why did you put it in your laundry room?
I spend a lot of time in there.
Yeah, exactly. So you can be exposed to it loads.
Actually, to be fair, my husband spends a lot more time in there now, so maybe I've subconsciously put it in there for him.
I was going to ask about Tim, actually. What's his faith like?
Yeah, that's been an interesting one. So we dated when I was 21, and he was 30, I think, because we're about 10 years apart. And he, interestingly enough, we dated before my dad died. So I was in that period of kind of no faith when we were dating. And he definitely wasn't talking about it. I mean, he's very British, so British people just don't talk about faith in general. But I did drag him to Easter service. And I remember, like, I was, so I don't know if you've heard of this saying, but this kind of a creaster.
Nope.
So kind of like a Christmas Easter churchgoer.
Mm-hmm.
It's called a creaster.
Yeah. That makes sense. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I've kind of laughed recently because I've missed a couple of the last Easter services. And, my mom will say, oh, did you go to church? And I'm like, I'm not a creaster. I don't need to go on Christmas and Easter. I go every other Sunday. Yeah. But I did drag Tim to church on Easter. I vividly remember that when we were dating. And, he didn't have a lot to say about faith at that time. And I don't think he had a lot to say. Well, he didn't. My husband is a very, he's a lovely man, but he's also a very private man. And so he doesn't open up about his feelings very often. Mm-hmm. But I think it was interesting because when we dated the first time, I kind of thought, well, I kind of, because I wasn't really a churchgoer at the time and faith wasn't that important to me at the time, it wasn't that important to the relationship either. However,
that must have changed.
Yeah, well, so that was when I was 21, and then we broke up. We broke up in November of the year I was 21, and we didn't see each other or speak to each other for 7 years. So, of course, I went through all of the stuff with my dad and everything else without him. And then when I was 27 and renewed my faith, I was living in California and I was going to a big mega church in California. And I ended up dating one of the pastors at the church. He was the youth pastor. And we did a very kind of Christian courting period where you do everything kind of by the book and you spend a whole year together, but you're not doing anything physical, well, not lots of things physical, I guess is my point. And you're kind of deciding whether or not you think you're going to want a serious relationship. It's a very strange, the courting thing is very strange because you're not very intimate, but you are spending a lot of time talking and being together. Yeah. Anyway, long story short, we got to an impasse where we got to that year period where we'd done a year. We liked each other a lot, but we had a theological argument about divorce. And
It's ironic.
Yeah, I know, it is ironic, isn't it? So his parents had gotten divorced, but his mother had, this is not Tim, this is my pastor boyfriend. His parents had gotten divorced, but his father had an affair and had secretly been cheating on his mother for years. And so when they got divorced, it was justified in his eyes. He came from a Pentecostal family. It was justified in his eyes because, divorce is allowed if one party's unfaithful, according to the Bible. So in my situation, he felt that my dad shouldn't have got divorced because my biological mom had skied into a tree and had this brain injury, and that actually, that in sickness and in health, for better or for worse, he should have stayed with her. Mm-hmm. Now, my father, and this is something that I knew about my dad, he had spent a lot of time praying about the situation, and he had worked with our family pastor to decide whether or not it was the right decision to actually divorce my biological mom. And, it was a horrible decision for him, and it was not easy. Yeah. But he made it based on what he thought was the right decision for my sister and I, and for our chance of survival. My biological mom had a lot of issues and was very, following the brain injury. And so it was very difficult to live with her. And as much as we loved her, she couldn't look after us and she couldn't take care of us. And the brain injury she had was quite severe. And you combine that with bipolar, and it's just not a safe or healthy environment for children. Mm-hmm. And it was really difficult for everybody, difficult for her, difficult for my dad, difficult for us. And, in the end, we came to an arrangement where my dad agreed to basically fund my biological mom to basically pay for her to live a comfortable life, and that we would see her regularly, but we would live with him. And it was a really, really difficult decision, but he did not make it without consulting God. He didn't make it without prayer. He didn't make it on a whim, and he didn't do it based on what he thought he wanted for himself. He did it on what he thought was the best for everybody. Mm-hmm. And so I said to this pastor boyfriend at the time, I said, I think that the divorce was okay. And I think that, my dad did everything he could possibly do to make sure it was right in the eyes of God. And, and so we had this big, huge, impasse. And so I was going to China. And he said, well, I think you should stay back from China and we should work on our relationship. And I said, if I don't go to China, I never will, because I kind of knew that if I did settle down with him, we would probably never leave California. And I really had an international heart and wanted to live abroad. And so I went to China for the 2008 Olympics, and I had come across Tim on Facebook, and I messaged him to just say, listen, I'm going to be in China if you're going to be in China too, because he was the head coach of the Swiss rowing team at that time. He's a former Olympic rower, gold and bronze medalist for Britain. Mm-hmm. And I said, if you're going to be in China at the same time, maybe we should, kind of let bygones be bygones and have a beer. And anyway, I left for China with a boyfriend, and I came back with a fiance, and they were not the same people. And but what's interesting, going back to the question, because I think I've taken a long time to answer it, is where's Tim with faith? When we were in China and we agreed to get together, I knew instantly. I mean, it was like love at first sight for the second time. He was always my soulmate. He was my soulmate 10 years earlier. We just weren't ready. And I knew instantly the second I saw him, he was the one still, and the only one that I wanted to be with. And and that was really difficult because I had really renewed my faith at that point in time. And the last 2 years had been really intense with my faith. And like I said, I baptism by the Holy Spirit, and I'd worked at the church that I lived in the community, worked at the church in my community, etc. And I really struggled with it because I thought, gosh, I can't marry him if we're not on the same page with faith. And I really prayed about it. And I have entries in my journal that are pages long, just asking God, why would you put someone back in my life like this, that if we don't have the same faith, etc. So we had a conversation, and he explained to me that when he was 15, that he had decided that he was going to get confirmed in the church. It was not a decision that his parents had made for him, that he had made that decision himself. Church has never been a priority of his, but he would, respect and honor my wishes to go to church and come as much as he could. And we had that conversation before we got engaged. And, we had 10 days where we were dating for the second time. And then he proposed at the end of the 10 days. But I spent many of those 10 days when I was not with him praying, just that it was the right decision, and that I wouldn't be making the worst decision of my life, and that I was, that it was a godly decision, and I truly believe that God wanted us to be together, that he is my soulmate. And I am comforted by the fact that he does believe in God. His faith is a different kind of faith to mine. He doesn't, like many Brits, doesn't feel the need or draw to be at church every single weekend, or to be reading devotionals or the Bible on a daily basis, or even to have an extremely active prayer life. But he respects my faith, and he supports my faith. And I've got to a point where I'm comfortable with the fact that if he wants to go to church, he should only go because he wants to, not because I'm forcing him to. And that, as a family, we should pray because we want to, not because I'm forcing anybody to. And so it's been a good counterbalance for me. But I'm comforted by the fact that he does actually respect and believe in the same God that I do.
Well, it'd be untenable if he didn't, really, wouldn't it? I would have thought.
I think it would have been. Definitely. Well, and actually, we wouldn't have gotten engaged if I didn't believe in my heart that it was the right thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but I have thought about that, interestingly enough, post marriage, where we have had challenges over the years, particularly around going to church, and about what we say to the children and how much we impact the children or impart our faith on the children, mine in particular.
Yes.
And so it's been tricky for sure, but I think there's a difference between someone who gets God, is there, and may not have the close relationship with God that you have, but that kind of gets it, and someone who actually stands in your way. And I think I have met many people and dated many people who, for them, there is no God, and it's not a conversation, and, they just don't respect it. And, and that's difficult. It's really difficult, because that would make it hard to even do what I'm doing in my own faith.
Well, that's the thing. It's the mutual respect. It's that you've got with one another to actually have the room to have permission to do this, to be who you are. And you don't need to be a mirror image of each other.
No, and actually, it's good. It's so good that, and I think if I didn't, in a funny way, if I was married to an American man who grew up with the American kind of black and white faith, I would be much more closed-minded. I think the fact that I am married to someone who has a very open mind and, has seen a lot of the world, it keeps me grounded, and it keeps me focused on the right things, and doesn't pigeonhole me too much, and doesn't get me, I don't go on the high horse too often, because there's no room for it.
Yes.
And I think that's really important, and that's where conflict gets bad, when there is the high horse and the pedestal and all the other things that come with.
It's the soapbox, isn't it? It's when, and really it's a return to the beginning of this conversation, which was about the we included the part about the kind of pain that can be inflicted on others when we are so sure that our way is the right way, that everyone should believe exactly what we believe in the way that we believe it. Whereas you've got a breadth and there's a fresh air that I can hear that you're describing, as much as you've faced challenges, of course, in talking, how do you, kind of express what you feel to your children, and how much of your life gets devoted to your beliefs, etc. On a practical kind of basis. I can hear that would be definitely under discussion, but that there's still air. There's still, in other words, people aren't being stifled.
Well, and I think it's really important to remember that the invitation to have Jesus in your heart is optional. It's free will. And that is the beauty of God. God has said, I am here for you. If you want me, that's your choice. And if, the very fact that he hasn't forced us to believe in him in the first place is one of the most fundamental principles of faith, is that you have a choice. And you shouldn't believe in something because you have to believe in it. You should believe in something because you want to believe in it. And, you should let things direct your life that you want to let direct your life, not be forced into things. And I think, that's a principle that's lost on a lot of people who are so black and white and so fundamental. And that's sad. And hopefully that's one of the dialogues that as I mature in my faith, and as I mature in my ability to speak about my faith, that I can help heal and bridge some of the gaps there.
Well, I think our conversation in itself is a beautiful testament to your maturing expression of your faith and ability to talk about it as a businesswoman, as a mother, and a change maker in the world, that you are standing, showing up and actually talking about your faith in very nuanced ways. And I'm really, really grateful for this. I feel like a really precious conversation. Joy, thank you. Thank you for this.
Well, thank you for being a supportive and wonderful friend, because that was something I was very nervous about talking about, but you eased my nerves.
Oh. Lots of love. Thank you. Only the other day, I was chatting with a friend about crying and how none of my guests have cried on this show. Not yet. And in fact, I've cried, rather surprisingly, at the start of my conversation with Jane Weicker in the episode called Self. Things happened. I just cried. It was interesting. I don't cry very often, let alone on a podcast that I'm hosting, but hey-ho. But today, the reason I'm talking about it is because I found Joy's choked telling of her dad's suicide compelling. And I have no idea how she didn't full-on sob. I really don't. Yeah, I just wanted to hug her. It's really very moving. And I also loved her description of God as comfort. And it kind of leaves me wanting more conversation on this. She's really, really sparked some things for me about the place of God and actually having faith in something bigger than yourself and ourselves. So I'm going to be chatting more with her and actually doing a bit of work with myself around faith. I wonder what you found in this particular episode. I'd love to hear. Write to me at podcast@schoolformothers.com. You know I love your letters. I really do. I get quite a lot, It's fabulous. Some of them are really quite intimate, and there's no way that I could ever shout out on them because it just wouldn't be right. So if you ever write to me in that vein, just put "not for podcast" on it, would you? Because I never want to say anything publicly that you don't want me to say from your emails. So yeah. As ever, I'll make sure we pop it on the resources that were mentioned. Joy named several books that were wonderful, sounded really great. I'm going to put them over in the show notes over at schoolformothers.com website, and you can find them there. And also, obviously, how to find Joy Foster herself and Tech Pixies and all that she's doing. She's a big mover and shaker and supporter of many thousands of women. That's it then. Really hope you're taking care of yourself. Stay safe. Loads of love.
Thank you for tuning in to the School for Mothers podcast. To continue the conversation and keep your dose of inspiration up, head over to schoolformothers.com/podcast where you'll find bonus content from Danusha and her guests on habits, recommendations, books, best apps, time-saving secrets, life hacks, health, sleep and anything in between. That's schoolformothers.com/podcast.